December 23, 1944. The rolling hills east of Bastogne, Belgium. Frozen mud crunched beneath the tracks of a Tiger I heavy tank as it maneuvered into hull-down position behind a shattered stone farmhouse. The commander, Obersturmführer Franz Bäke of Heavy SS Panzer Battalion 501, scanned the fog-shrouded valley below through his commander's cupola. Intelligence reports indicated American armor concentrations approximately 3,000 yards forward, likely elements of the 4th Armored Division attempting to relieve the surrounded 101st Airborne at Bastogne. Bäke felt confident. At 3,000 yards, the American 75mm Sherman guns were effectively harmless against his Tiger's frontal armor. Even the newer American 76mm guns, now appearing in limited numbers, required dangerously close ranges to pose any serious threat to his vehicle. The Tiger could engage and destroy American tanks long before they closed to effective range. This tactical calculus had shaped German armor doctrine for 2 years. What neither Bäke nor Luftwaffe reconnaissance had identified was that the American units maneuvering toward Bastogne included something new. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M36 tank destroyers mounting the 90mm gun M3. These vehicles had only entered combat in Europe 6 weeks earlier, and German intelligence had not yet fully assessed their capabilities. The fog lifted slightly around 10:15 that morning. Bäke identified targets. American armored vehicles, 6 of them, advancing in tactical formation approximately 2,000 yards distant. The shapes seemed wrong for standard Shermans. The turrets appeared larger, the guns heavier. Before he could analyze further, the lead American vehicle halted and its turret traversed toward his position. The muzzle flash arrived before the sound. The 90mm armor-piercing projectile struck the Tiger's frontal glacis plate at a velocity of 2,600 feet per second. The hardened steel penetrator punched completely through 100 millimeters of face-hardened armor plate, passed through the transmission housing, and detonated in the crew compartment. The Tiger's ammunition exploded 3 seconds later. Bäke and his crew died instantly. The engagement lasted 48 seconds. 4 more Tigers from Heavy SS Panzer Battalion 501 were destroyed that morning by 90mm guns firing at ranges between 1,800 and 2,400 yards. German tank commanders who had operated with tactical impunity based on range advantage for 2 years discovered their supposedly invulnerable positions were now vulnerable to American fire at distances where they themselves could barely identify targets through winter fog. The American 90mm gun had fundamentally altered the tactical equation of tank warfare on the Western Front, and German forces had not anticipated it. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The development of the American 90mm anti-aircraft gun began in 1940, long before the United States entered World War II. The Army's Ordnance Department recognized that existing anti-aircraft weapons lacked sufficient range and hitting power to engage modern bombers flying at altitudes above 20,000 feet. Engineering work centered at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland focused on creating a high-velocity gun that could deliver a 15-pound projectile to altitudes exceeding 30,000 feet. The result was the 90mm gun M1, which entered service in 1941 as an anti-aircraft weapon. The M1 fired a projectile weighing 23.4 pounds. To a maximum altitude of 39,800 feet, muzzle velocity reached 2,700 feet per second. The weapon proved highly effective in its designed role, destroying German and Japanese aircraft throughout the war. But the gun's high velocity and heavy projectile also made it potentially effective against armored targets. This potential was not lost on American ordnance officers studying reports from North Africa in 1943. The problem facing American armored forces in 1943 centered on the inadequacy of existing anti-tank weapons against German heavy armor. The standard American tank, the M4 Sherman, mounted a 75mm gun that fired a 14.7-pound armor-piercing projectile at muzzle velocity of 2,030 feet per second. Against German Panzer III and Panzer IV medium tanks, this weapon proved adequate. Against Tiger and Panther tanks, it was dangerously insufficient. Combat reports from Tunisia, analysed by the Ordnance Department in June 1943, revealed the scope of the problem. The Tiger I heavy tank featured frontal armour, 100mm thick at 56 degrees slope. The Sherman's 75mm armour-piercing shell could not penetrate this armour at any combat range from frontal aspect. Even flank attacks required ranges under 500 yards for reliable penetration. The Tiger's 88mm gun could destroy Shermans at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. This range disparity created a tactical situation where American tank crews had to close to suicidally close distances to engage Tigers effectively, while German tankers could engage with impunity at comfortable standoff ranges. The German Panther medium tank, entering service in significant numbers during 1943, presented similar challenges. The Panther's glacis plate measured 80mm thick at 55 degrees slope, creating an effective thickness of approximately 140mm against horizontal projectile impact. The Sherman's 75mm gun could not reliably penetrate Panther frontal armour at any practical combat range. American tank commanders facing Panthers and Tigers in Italy during the autumn of 1943 developed tactics emphasizing numerical advantage, maneuver to achieve flank shots, and close-range ambush. These tactics worked when conditions permitted, but they resulted in Sherman losses that exceeded sustainable rates. During the fighting around Monte Cassino in January 1944, American armored units experienced tank loss rates approaching 20% per engagement when German heavy armor was present. These losses could not be sustained even with American industrial output producing thousands of Sherman tanks monthly. The Ordnance Department pursued multiple solutions. One approach involved developing a new main gun for the Sherman. The 76mm gun M1, entering production in early 1944, fired a heavier projectile at higher velocity than the 75mm weapon. The 76mm armor-piercing shot weighed 15.4 pounds and left the muzzle at 2,600 feet per second. This provided significantly improved armor penetration, but still insufficient to reliably penetrate Tiger or Panther frontal armor at combat ranges. Testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground in March 1944 demonstrated that the 76mm gun could penetrate Tiger frontal armor only at ranges under 600 yards under ideal conditions. Panther glacis armor remained effectively immune at all ranges. The 76mm gun-equipped Shermans were an improvement but not a solution. A more radical approach involved the tank destroyer concept. American doctrine developed before the war emphasized tank destroyers as specialized anti-tank vehicles, more mobile than tanks but more heavily armed. The M10 tank destroyer, mounting a 3-inch gun, entered service in 1942. The M18 Hellcat, armed with a 76mm gun, followed in 1944. But neither vehicle mounted weapons powerful enough to reliably engage Tigers at safe ranges. By mid-1944, American forces needed a tank destroyer mounting a gun capable of defeating German heavy armor at ranges exceeding 1,500 yards. The solution emerged from reconsidering the 90mm anti-aircraft gun for ground combat use. The weapon's high velocity and heavy projectile offered theoretical armor penetration far exceeding any existing American tank or anti-tank gun. In May 1944, the Ordnance Department initiated Project 493, authorizing development of a tank destroyer mounting the 90mm gun. Engineers at Aberdeen Proving Ground and Fisher Tank Arsenal faced significant challenges. The 90mm anti-aircraft gun in its standard mounting weighed over 19,000 pounds, far too heavy for installation in a mobile armoured vehicle. The weapon's recoil force exceeded the structural capacity of existing tank destroyer chassis. Solving these problems required extensive redesign. The anti-aircraft gun was modified to create a tank gun variant designated the 90mm gun M3. The recoil mechanism was strengthened. The barrel was modified for compatibility with armor-piercing ammunition. The mounting was redesigned to fit within a turret. The completed M3 gun weighed 9,200 pounds, still heavy but manageable within a sufficiently robust turret and chassis. The chassis selected was a modified M10A1 tank destroyer hull mounting a new, larger turret. The resulting vehicle was designated M36. The M36's turret featured an open-top design similar to earlier American tank destroyers, reducing weight but leaving the crew exposed to artillery airbursts and small arms fire. Armor protection remained modest. The frontal hull armor measured 2 inches thick, sloped at 55 degrees. The turret front measured 3 inches thick. This protection was adequate against small arms and shell fragments, but insufficient against German anti-tank guns or tank main guns. The M36 was not designed to exchange fire with enemy tanks. American tank destroyer doctrine emphasized mobility and ambush tactics. The tank destroyer would occupy concealed positions, engage enemy armor at maximum range using its superior firepower, then relocate before enemy forces could return effective fire. The 90mm gun gave the M36 the firepower component of this tactical approach. Speed and agility provided the mobility component. The M36 weighed approximately 31 tons, powered by a Ford GAA V8 engine producing 500 horsepower. Maximum road speed reached 26 miles per hour. Cross-country mobility equaled or exceeded that of the Sherman tank. The gun could traverse 180 degrees in under 20 seconds. These characteristics suited the vehicle for its intended role. Ammunition development paralleled vehicle development. The 90mm M3 gun fired multiple projectile types. The armor-piercing capped ballistic cap round, designated APC-BC M82, weighed 24 pounds, with a projectile weight of 24.3 pounds. Muzzle velocity reached 2,800 feet per second. At 1,000 yards range, this projectile could penetrate 6.3 inches of face-hardened armor plate at 30 degrees obliquity. At 2,000 yards, penetration decreased to approximately 5.2 inches under the same conditions. These figures meant the M82 projectile could penetrate Tiger I frontal armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards and Panther side armor at similar distances. Against Tiger side armor, measuring 80 mm thickness, penetration was assured at any combat range. The high-explosive round, M71, provided anti-personnel capability and could be used against fortifications, soft targets, and enemy positions. A new armor-piercing projectile utilizing tungsten carbide cores was under development but would not reach units until 1945. The standard M82 round provided sufficient performance for immediate combat requirements. Production of the M36 began in July 1944 at Fisher Tank Arsenal in Michigan and Pressed Steel Car Company in Pennsylvania. Initial production targets called for 300 vehicles monthly. The first M36S reached European Theatre of Operations in September 1944, assigned to the 603rd Tank Destroyer Battalion stationed in France. Combat testing began immediately in the fighting around Nancy and Metz. Results exceeded expectations. M36 crews reported successful engagements against German armor at ranges between 1,500 and 2,500 yards, distances at which German tanks struggled to identify the M36 as a priority target among the general chaos of armored combat. The 90mm gun's high velocity produced a flat trajectory that simplified range estimation and improved hit probability. Crews with minimal training could achieve effective fire at extended ranges. By November 1944, additional M36-equipped battalions had deployed to frontline units. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion received its M36S in early November and completed familiarization training at a depot near Verdun. The battalion consisted of 3 companies, each with 12 M36 tank destroyers, for a total battalion strength of 36 vehicles, plus headquarters, and reconnaissance elements. Company commanders emphasized the need for proper camouflage and concealment. The M36's thin armor would not survive direct hits from German tank guns. Survivability depended on engaging from concealed positions at maximum range, destroying enemy armor before the German crews could identify the M36's location and return fire. This tactical approach required crew discipline and adherence to tank destroyer doctrine. During training exercises, crews practiced rapid occupation of firing positions, engagement of targets at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards, and immediate relocation after firing. The M36's mobility allowed it to shift positions quickly, confusing enemy targeting and reducing vulnerability. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion deployed to the Ardennes sector in late November 1944, assigned to support armoured and infantry units holding thinly stretched defensive positions along the German border. The sector was considered quiet, a place where depleted units could rest and integrate replacements. Intelligence assessments indicated minimal German offensive capability in the region. This assessment proved catastrophically wrong. On December 16, 1944, German forces launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, the Ardennes offensive, striking through the thinly defended American positions with over 200,000 troops, thousands of armoured vehicles, and concentrated artillery support. The offensive achieved complete tactical surprise, penetrating American lines across a 50-mile front. Among the German forces committed were multiple heavy tank battalions, equipped with Tiger I and Tiger II heavy tanks and Panther medium tanks. These units spearheaded the armoured thrusts attempting to cross the Meuse River and reach Antwerp. The German plan depended on rapid exploitation of the breakthrough before American reserves could respond. Speed was essential. German planners calculated that the offensive had perhaps 1 week before American reinforcements would arrive in sufficient strength to contain and reverse German gains. Within 24 hours of the initial assault, German armoured spearheads had advanced over 20 miles in some sectors. American units fought desperate delaying actions, attempting to slow German progress while reinforcements moved toward the battle area. The town of Bastogne, a critical road junction, became the focal point of American defensive efforts. The 101st Airborne Division, rushed to Bastogne by truck convoy, occupied defensive positions surrounding the town on December 19th. German forces surrounded Bastogne on December 21st, cutting all ground routes. The 101st Airborne was isolated, dependent on air supply until relieving forces could break through. General George Patton's Third Army, positioned to the south, received orders to disengage from operations in the Saar region, pivot 90 degrees north, and attack toward Bastogne to relieve the surrounded garrison. This represented one of the most complex military maneuvers of the war, requiring an entire army to change direction mid-campaign and launch a coordinated offensive within days. Patton's forces began moving north on December 21st. Among the units in Third Army were elements of 4th Armoured Division and supporting tank destroyer battalions, including the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion with its M36 90mm guns. The drive toward Bastogne began on December 22nd. 4th Armoured Division attacked north along 2 parallel routes, attempting to penetrate German defensive lines that had formed around the Bastogne perimeter. German forces defending against this relief attempt included elements of the 5th Panzer Army, reinforced by heavy armour from the Ardennes Offensive Reserve, including Tigers from Heavy SS Panzer Battalion 501. The terrain favoured defence. Rolling hills covered with forest and small villages provided excellent defensive positions. Winter weather limited visibility and complicated manoeuvre. German forces, fighting defensive battles on terrain they had prepared, proved difficult to dislodge. Initial attacks on December 22nd gained only minimal ground against fierce resistance. Combat was intense, and casualties mounted rapidly on both sides. December 23rd brought deteriorating weather conditions. Heavy fog settled across the battlefield, reducing visibility to less than 500 yards in many areas. American commanders faced difficult decisions. Attacking through fog against prepared German positions risked heavy casualties and limited the effectiveness of American tactical air support, which had been crucial to slowing the German offensive. But delay allowed German forces to strengthen their positions and brought no guarantee of better weather. The attack continued. Company B of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, attached to Combat Command A of 4th Armoured Division, moved forward in support of Sherman tank platoons from the 37th Tank Battalion. The mission was to advance along a secondary road toward the village of Chaumont, approximately 8 miles south of Bastogne, and secure crossings over a small stream that formed a natural defensive barrier. Intelligence reports indicated German armor in the area, but specifics remained vague. The fog made reconnaissance impossible. American units would discover German positions by making contact, a dangerous but unavoidable approach given the circumstances. The column moved cautiously through the fog. Lieutenant James Ferrez commanded the lead M36, positioning his vehicle approximately 200 yards behind the forward Sherman tanks. Tank destroyer doctrine emphasized following tanks rather than leading, allowing the more heavily armored Shermans to absorb initial contact, while the M36S provided long-range fire support from positions slightly to the rear. At approximately 1000 hours, the column approached a ridgeline overlooking a shallow valley. The lead Sherman crested the ridge and immediately radioed contact. German armor, composition uncertain, approximately 2,000 yards forward in hull-down positions along the far ridge. The Sherman commander reported seeing large tanks, possibly Tigers or Panthers, but positive identification was impossible through the fog. Ferrez's M36 moved to the crest of the ridge and took position behind a destroyed stone wall that provided minimal cover. His gunner, Sergeant Robert Chen, identified 6 targets through his telescopic sight. The vehicles showed the characteristic hull shape and size of Tiger-heavy tanks positioned to cover the valley approaches. Range estimated at 2,200 yards. Under normal circumstances, Sherman tanks would maneuver to find flanking positions before engaging such targets at such ranges. But the fog prevented maneuver. The valley was open ground, offering no cover for maneuvering tanks. Attacking across the valley would expose American armor to concentrated German fire with no possibility of cover or concealment. The tactical situation demanded engagement at current ranges or withdrawal. Ferrez made the decision to engage. His training emphasized that the 90mm gun could penetrate Tiger armor at ranges where German guns struggled to achieve precision against partially concealed targets. The M36's low profile behind the stone wall provided some protection. The fog, while limiting his visibility, also limited German ability to observe his position. He ordered Chen to engage the leftmost Tiger. Chen laid the gun carefully, compensating for range and the slight crosswind. The M36 carried 47 rounds of 90mm ammunition, a mix of armor-piercing and high-explosive. For this engagement, only armor-piercing mattered. The projectile loaded was an M82 APC-BC round, 24 pounds of hardened steel and explosive designed specifically to defeat heavy armor. Chen fired at 10:07 hours. The 90mm gun's report echoed across the valley. Recoil drove the 31-ton vehicle backward 18 inches, despite the recoil mechanisms. The armor-piercing projectile crossed 2,200 yards in approximately 2.5 seconds, striking the Tiger's frontal glacis plate, slightly right of center. The hardened penetrator punched through the 100mm armor plate and continued into the crew compartment. The Tiger exploded 6 seconds later as onboard ammunition cooked off. The massive vehicle burned with characteristic thick black smoke. Chen had already traversed to the second target. The second Tiger attempted to reverse into cover, its commander recognizing the threat but uncertain of the source. The fog concealed Ferrez's position effectively. Chen fired again at 10:08 hours. This round struck the Tiger's turret front, penetrating the gun mantlet and detonating inside the turret. The second Tiger ceased movement immediately. Both shots had been fired at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards, distances at which Tiger commanders had operated with confidence for 2 years based on the assumption that American guns could not effectively engage at such ranges. The remaining 4 Tigers began relocating, their commanders now aware they faced a serious threat, but unable to identify its exact position through the fog. 2 Tigers moved laterally along the ridge, seeking better firing positions. 2 reversed behind the ridge crest, attempting to break contact and find hull-down positions further back. Franz's M36 fired 4 more rounds in the next 3 minutes, destroying 1 additional Tiger and damaging another that leaked smoke from its engine compartment but managed to retreat behind the ridge. The engagement concluded at 10:12 hours, when the surviving German tanks withdrew beyond visual range. American casualties were nil. The M36 had not been hit. The supporting Sherman tanks had not fired a shot, their 75mm guns unable to engage effectively at the ranges involved. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment, subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Similar engagements occurred repeatedly during the final week of December 1944 as 4th Armoured Division fought toward Bastogne. M36 tank destroyers engaged German heavy armour at ranges between 1,500 and 2,500 yards, achieving kill rates that shocked both American and German forces. After-action reports from the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion documented 23 confirmed kills of German heavy tanks between December 23 and December 26. Battalion losses during the same period were 4 M36s destroyed, primarily by German anti-tank guns and artillery rather than by tank fire. The exchange ratio favoured American forces decisively. German units facing the M36 for the first time reported the encounters with confusion and concern. After-action reports from Heavy SS Panzer Battalion 501, captured after the war and now held in the United States National Archives, to describe engagements on December 23, where Tigers were destroyed at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters by an unknown American weapon. The battalion commander noted that the projectiles had completely penetrated frontal armor, something previously thought impossible from American tank guns. Intelligence officers initially speculated that American forces had deployed British 17-pound anti-tank guns, which were known to have excellent armor penetration. The alternative explanation, that American forces possessed a domestically produced gun with such capability, was considered but deemed unlikely based on previous intelligence assessments of American anti-tank weapons. German intelligence's failure to anticipate the M36's capabilities reflected systematic underestimation of American industrial capacity and weapons development programs. Throughout 1944, German intelligence focused primarily on tracking Sherman tank variants and known anti-tank guns, like the 3-inch gun mounted on the M10 tank destroyer. The 90mm gun's existence as an anti-aircraft weapon was well known, but German analysts had not expected American engineers to successfully adapt it for anti-tank use so rapidly. This intelligence failure paralleled similar failures regarding American fighter escort capabilities earlier in the war and reflected a broader German tendency to underestimate Allied technical and industrial achievements. The breakthrough to Bastogne occurred on December 26, 1944. Elements of 4th Armoured Division, including units supported by the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, penetrated German defences and established a corridor to the surrounded garrison. The 101st Airborne Division had held Bastogne for 7 days against overwhelming German forces, sustained only by air-dropped supplies. The relief opened a supply route that allowed wounded to be evacuated and ammunition and reinforcements to reach the defenders. The German offensive had been contained, though fighting would continue through January 1945 before the Ardennes salient was fully eliminated. The role of the M36 in this achievement was significant but not decisive in isolation. The relief of Bastogne resulted from multiple factors, including the determined defence by the 101st Airborne, 3rd Army's rapid reorientation and attack northward, effective use of artillery and tactical air support when weather permitted, and the gradual exhaustion of German fuel supplies and momentum. But the M36 provided American armoured units with a capability they had previously lacked: the ability to engage German heavy armor at ranges where American forces held tactical advantage. This capability improved American tank crews' confidence and reduced casualties in encounters with Tigers and Panthers. Production of the M36 accelerated through early 1945. By March 1945, over 1,400 M36 tank destroyers had been produced, and most had deployed to frontline units in Europe. Additional M36s deployed to the Pacific Theater, though their primary utility there was providing fire support rather than engaging armored targets, as Japanese armored forces posed minimal threat by that stage of the war. In Europe, M36-equipped battalions participated in the final campaigns from the Rhine, crossing through to Germany's surrender in May 1945. The 90mm gun's effectiveness extended beyond the M36 tank destroyer. In February 1945, a variant of the Sherman tank mounting the 90mm gun entered limited production. Designated the M26 Pershing heavy tank, this vehicle provided American armored forces with a tank that could engage German heavy armor on more equal terms. The M26 weighed 46 tons, mounting the 90mm gun M3 in a fully enclosed turret with significantly better armor protection than the M36. However, the M26 arrived too late to significantly impact the war. Only approximately 300 M26 tanks reached Europe before Germany's surrender, and most saw limited combat. The M36, by contrast, had been present in significant numbers during the critical battles of December 1944 and January 1945, when American forces stopped and reversed the Ardennes offensive. German responses to the M36 evolved during the final months of the war. Tactical guidance issued to panzer units in February 1945 warned that American forces possessed tank destroyers capable of defeating Tiger and Panther armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. German tank commanders were instructed to engage suspected tank destroyer positions with indirect artillery fire before exposing their vehicles, and to use terrain and concealment more aggressively when operating in areas where M36s might be present. These tactical adjustments reduced M36 effectiveness somewhat, but by early 1945 German armored forces were so depleted and fuel-starved that tactical adjustments mattered little to the overall strategic situation. The Tiger tank, which had dominated European battlefields through 1944 based largely on its range advantage and armor invulnerability, found its tactical niche eliminated by the M36. A Tiger commander who previously could engage American armor at 2,000 yards with confidence that return fire was impossible, now faced a weapon that could penetrate his armor at those same ranges. The psychological impact paralleled the Tiger phobia American tankers had experienced in 1943, but in reverse. German tank crews who encountered M36s reported heightened caution and reluctance to expose their vehicles at ranges they had previously considered safe. The technical comparison between the German 88mm gun and the American 90mm gun reveals interesting parallels and differences. The German 88mm KIK-36L56 gun mounted on the Tiger I fired a projectile weighing approximately 22 pounds at a muzzle velocity of 2,650 feet per second. At 2,000 meters range, this weapon could penetrate approximately 120 millimeters of armor plate at 30 degrees obliquity. The American 90mm M3 gun fired a slightly heavier projectile at comparable velocity and achieved similar penetration performance. In practical terms, the two weapons were roughly equivalent in anti-armor capability. The difference was not technical superiority, but rather deployment context and tactical application. The 88mm gun equipped relatively few German vehicles. Tiger production totaled approximately 1,500 vehicles throughout the war, with production constrained by the Tiger's mechanical complexity and resource demands. The 90mm gun equipped over 1,400 M36 tank destroyers, plus additional M26 Pershing tanks, all produced in the final year of the war. American industrial capacity enabled mass production of vehicles mounting guns comparable in performance to Germany's best anti-tank weapons. German industrial capacity, strained by strategic bombing, resource shortages, and competing production priorities, could not match American output in vehicle numbers, even when German weapons possessed technical advantages. This pattern repeated across multiple weapons categories during World War II. German engineering often produced technically superior individual weapons. The Tiger tank was superior to the Sherman in armor and firepower. The Panther tank was an excellent medium tank design. The MG-42 machine gun was arguably the best squad automatic weapon of the war. German jet fighters represented technological achievements beyond Allied equivalents in 1944, but technical superiority in individual weapons systems did not translate to strategic advantage when the technically superior weapons could not be produced in sufficient quantities, could not be supplied with adequate fuel and ammunition, and could not be operated by sufficiently trained crews in sufficient numbers to affect operational outcomes. The story of the M36 and the 90mm gun illustrates this principle from the Allied perspective. American weapons were often criticized as technically inferior to German equivalents. The Sherman tank's armor and firepower were inferior to the Tiger and Panther. American infantry rifles used older designs compared to German semi-automatic and assault rifle developments. American artillery, while effective and produced in enormous quantities, used conventional designs rather than pursuing innovative concepts like German rocket artillery. Yet American weapons were adequate for their tasks, manufacturable in the quantities needed, supportable, with sufficient fuel and ammunition, and operated by crews with sufficient training. Adequate weapons available in overwhelming numbers proved more strategically valuable than superior weapons available in limited quantities. The 90mm gun exemplified this principle. It was not revolutionary in design. It adapted existing anti-aircraft gun technology for anti-tank use, a straightforward engineering challenge requiring competent execution rather than innovative breakthroughs. The M36 tank destroyer mounting the gun was a modified existing chassis rather than a completely new design, speeding development and production. The result was a weapon system that met the specific requirement of engaging German heavy armor at extended ranges, was producible in quantity using available industrial capacity, and was deployable to frontline units in time to effect critical battles. This represented effective systems engineering, responding to operational requirements within resource and time constraints. Post-war analysis by both American and German military historians has generally concluded that the M36's impact on the war's outcome was meaningful but not decisive. German defeat resulted from multiple factors operating over several years, including numerical inferiority on all fronts, fuel and resource exhaustion, strategic bombing of industry and infrastructure, loss of air superiority, and the cumulative attrition of experienced personnel faster than replacements could be trained. No single weapons system determined the outcome. However, the M36 provided American armored forces with improved capability at a critical moment when German forces launched their final major offensive in the West. The ability to effectively counter German heavy armor during the Ardennes offensive contributed to containing and defeating that offensive, which in turn ensured that Allied advances into Germany could proceed on schedule in early 1945. The legacy of the 90mm gun extended beyond World War II. The M26 Pershing tank equipped American armored forces in the immediate post-war period and saw combat during the Korean War beginning in 1950. The 90mm gun proved effective against Soviet-supplied T-34 medium tanks operated by North Korean forces, providing American tankers with a weapon that could engage enemy armor at comfortable ranges. Development of American tank guns continued through the 1950s, with the 90mm gun eventually replaced by larger caliber weapons, as post-war tank designs emphasized heavier armor and more powerful guns in response to Cold War requirements. The M36 tank destroyer served with American forces through the Korean War and remained in service with Allied nations into the 1960s and 70s. Some M36s saw combat as late as the 1990s in Yugoslav conflicts, testament to the basic design's durability and the 90mm gun's continued effectiveness against older armoured vehicles. The long service life reflected the vehicle's solid engineering and the reality that many nations could not afford more modern equipment. A tank destroyer designed in 1944 remained militarily useful 50 years later in certain contexts. The German perspective on the M36 and 90mm gun, documented in post-war interrogations of Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS officers, revealed professional respect for American industrial and engineering capabilities. German officers generally acknowledged that while German armor possessed technical advantages in protection and firepower, American forces compensated through numerical superiority and adequate weapons available in overwhelming quantities. Several German officers noted that encountering the M36 in December 1944 represented a tactical surprise, but not a strategic revelation. By late 1944, German commanders understood that American industrial capacity would eventually provide American forces with weapons matching or exceeding German capabilities across all categories. The M36 simply confirmed this understanding in the anti-armor category. The testing and evaluation of captured M36 tank destroyers by German technical services in early 1945 produced detailed assessments of the vehicle's strengths and weaknesses. German engineers praised the 90mm gun's performance and the vehicle's mechanical reliability. Criticisms focused on the M36's thin armor and open-topped turret, both of which were inherent to American tank destroyer doctrine, emphasizing mobility and firepower over protection. German analysts noted that the M36 was optimized for its specific tactical role and performed that role effectively. This represented a different design philosophy than German vehicles, which typically emphasized heavy protection alongside firepower, accepting reduced mobility and increased mechanical complexity as trade-offs. These different design philosophies reflected different strategic contexts. Germany, fighting defensive campaigns across Europe against multiple enemies by 1944, prioritized heavily protected vehicles capable of conducting defensive operations from prepared positions. Mobility was less critical when vehicles operated primarily in defensive roles with limited fuel supplies, restricting maneuver. American forces, conducting offensive operations with secure supply lines and abundant fuel, could prioritize mobility and accept lighter armor protection because their tactical doctrine emphasized movement and concentration of force rather than static defense. Neither approach was objectively superior. Each represented appropriate responses to different operational requirements and resource availabilities. The human stories behind the M36's combat employment added personal dimensions to the technical and tactical narrative. Tank destroyer crews who operated M36s in combat during the final months of the war left memoirs and oral histories documenting their experiences. These accounts consistently emphasize several themes. First, crews appreciated the 90mm gun's capability and the confidence it provided when facing German heavy armor. Knowing they possessed a weapon that could penetrate Tiger armor at extended ranges reduced the fear and anxiety that had characterized earlier encounters with German heavy tanks. Second, crews remained acutely aware of their vehicle's vulnerability. The M36's thin armor meant that any hit from German anti-tank weapons would likely be catastrophic. Survival depended on remaining undetected, engaging from concealed positions, and relocating immediately after firing. Third, crews took pride in their role and their technical competence. Operating the M36 effectively required skill in gunnery, terrain evaluation, and tactical discipline. Successful crews developed these skills through training and combat experience. Lieutenant James Farese, whose M36 engaged German Tigers on December 23, 1944, survived the war and returned to the United States in July 1945. In interviews conducted in the 1980s for oral history projects, he described the December 23 engagement as both terrifying and professionally satisfying. Terrifying because he was engaging vehicles that could destroy his M36 with a single hit if they located his position. satisfying because his training and his crew's skill enabled them to perform their mission effectively. He emphasized that the M36 provided American forces with a tool they desperately needed, but that the tool's effectiveness depended entirely on how crews employed it. Poor tactics would get M36 crews killed as quickly as poor tactics got Sherman crews killed. The 90mm gun was not a magic solution, but rather an appropriate weapon that required professional employment. The question of whether German forces expected the M36's capabilities requires careful consideration. German intelligence had access to information about American weapons development through multiple sources, including signals intelligence, prisoner interrogation, and analysis of captured equipment. By late 1944, German intelligence knew American forces were developing improved anti-tank weapons. However, the specific capabilities of the 90mm gun and the M36 platform were not fully assessed before these weapons appeared in combat. German intelligence focused primarily on known threats and struggled to track American weapons development comprehensively, as the German intelligence apparatus deteriorated under pressure of strategic bombing and general military collapse. The result was tactical surprise when M36s engaged German armor in December 1944, even though the existence of American programs to develop improved anti-tank weapons was not itself surprising. This intelligence gap reflected broader German difficulties in accurately assessing Allied capabilities during the war's final year. German intelligence consistently underestimated Allied industrial output, technical capabilities, and operational effectiveness. These underestimations stemmed partly from institutional biases within German military culture that assumed German technical and tactical superiority, partly from Nazi ideology that dismissed democratic nations as decadent and militarily weak, and partly from the simple difficulty of collecting accurate intelligence against enemies who controlled the air and seas and systematically degraded German intelligence networks through counterintelligence operations. The result was that German forces repeatedly encountered Allied capabilities that surprised them tactically, even when the strategic trends were apparent. The M36 tank destroyer, mounting the 90mm gun, represented effective American military-industrial response to specific operational requirements. American forces needed a weapon system capable of engaging German heavy armor at extended ranges. American industry produced such a weapon by adapting existing technology, manufacturing it in quantity, and deploying it to frontline units in time to effect critical battles. The weapon was not technically revolutionary, but it was adequate for its purpose, available in sufficient numbers, and supported by the logistics infrastructure necessary to sustain operations. These characteristics made it strategically valuable, despite being unremarkable from pure technical perspective. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.